Good evening. Welcome to the 10th Annual Schoke Jewish Family Service Saul Cohen Lecture. I'm Paul Gordon, the Board Chair of Schoke JFS. Well, here we are again. Last spring, when we presented the 9th Annual Saul Cohen Lecture as a remote series, we had so hoped that we'd be together this year in person for number 10. Unfortunately, it just didn't happen. All I can say is keep your fingers crossed for next year. We have a great program this evening featuring Rabbi Steve Leder. This year, the program also is co-sponsored by the Stanford Jewish Community Center for Arts and Culture. Thanks, JCC, for joining us. Rabbi Leder's topic tonight is a great one. If I had to go through hell, don't come out empty-handed. I can't think of a better example of this than Schoke JFS. When the pandemic hit, we really didn't know what our future would look like, and we feared the worst. Instead, we are thriving. Thanks to the generosity of our donors, our two federations, and so many others, we are on a sound financial footing, enabling us to pivot to be sure to meet the ever-growing needs of our community. Our growing staff has taken their dedication to a new level to assure we stayed on mission, and our volunteers are there when we need them to help make sure everything gets done. In a few minutes, Matt Greenberg will give you a few examples of what's currently happening. But first, I want to offer some thanks. For the first 8 years of the Saul Cohen Lecture, we had something called a patrons reception, which took place prior to the lecture for those donors who gave more than what might be considered typical. It involved cocktails and hors d'oeuvres and a short presentation by our speaker. Last year and this year, we have greatly missed having this get-together. This year, we either sent or delivered a small gift box to each of our patrons just to make sure you knew we still appreciated you. And we hope to see you all next year live. As I mentioned earlier, we received significant support from two federations, the United Jewish Federation of Stamford, New Canaan, and Darien, and the Federation for Jewish Philanthropy of Upper Fairfield County. For both federations, this is Super Sunday time. This past Sunday was Super Sunday for the Stamford Federation. If you received a call and didn't return it, please do so or log into their website and make a commitment. This Sunday is the Upper Fairfield County Federation Super Sunday. When you receive a call, please take the call and make a commitment. These two organizations are critical, not only for the future of Schoke JFS, but also for so many important organizations in our communities. I urge you to support them. Finally, as always, I want to once again thank Mimi Cohen and the Cohen family for continuing to offer this program in memory of Saul and as a gift to our community. And with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of Schoke Jewish Family Service, Matt Greenberg.
Good evening. And like Paul said, I want to welcome you to the 10th Annual Saul Cohen Schoke JFS Lecture. It's hard to believe that it's been almost 12 years since Saul and Mimi, Lauren Scheinman, one of our past presidents, and I sat down to talk about a way to honor Saul for his devotion to the Jewish community in general and to Schoke JFS in particular. So we decided on an annual lecture, but Saul had a dream. Not just another lecture, but one that would present topics of a family nature dealing with important, relevant, timely subjects. It was also very important to Saul that we had the opportunity to thank you, our donors and supporters, for being part of the Schoke JFS family. I just mentioned that Saul had a dream. Of course, if you knew Saul, you know that he dreamed a lot. Well, actually, they weren't dreams. Saul's ideas usually came at about 3 a.m., and then I would find an email in my inbox first thing in the morning with a suggestion of things that Saul thought I needed to be thinking about. And of course, more often than not, he was right. Through the great blessings of technology, I went back and I was able to find one of those emails that Saul sent me several years ago. I'd like to share that with you. And I quote, "Matt has often accused me of always thinking, well, I won't apologize, but I'm at it again. So I've got a challenge for you. Our world is changing so rapidly, from the internet and technology, from space travel and climate change that threatens our planet, from advances in medicine and healthcare and nutrition and philanthropy and employment issues and on and on and on. It's like if we're not moving forward and thinking about tomorrow and planning for the future, we're falling back. So what has Schoke JFS done about this? Well, probably more than many other nonprofits, but who knows? We've done some really solid long-range strategic planning, but that's been based on the world as it exists today. We've also spent some time refocusing and planning for the agency within a changing world. What I thought we should consider is this. We've always viewed the primary mantra of our agency as being for helping people in need. While we definitely can't walk away from that terribly important objective, maybe what we also now have to do is expend some resources on an additional mantra, helping people to prevent need. We would become proactive in addition to being reactive. No one else does this in toto, and it too is an important need. I took those words to heart, and I still do, and I think Saul would have been proud of how Schoke Jewish Family Service is adapting to a changing world. He likely could never have imagined living in a world suffering through a global pandemic, but Schoke JFS began planning and refocusing to help people prevent needs. We, of course, like others, pivoted to online services, providing counseling and groups to people who did have those needs. What we learned is that this is the way some of our clients prefer it, and this is the way we will continue to provide services in the future for those who cannot physically attend. We brought technology to the elderly Holocaust survivors who were isolated and lonely. This allowed them to thrive in an entirely new environment, in some cases even better than before. We also brought technology to other seniors through our brain fitness program, enabling them to participate in classes and programs that enhance memory and prevent them from declining. Our Grow You program is helping families become financially independent and plan for the future. There are other programs that are exploring ways to prevent homelessness and food insecurity. These programs, as Saul imagined, helped to prevent need. Lack of transportation, isolation, difficulty walking are all impediments to getting help, which then can lead to even greater challenges. These are just a few of the ways that Schoke Jewish Family Service is putting Saul's suggestion into action. To really see the full extent of our initiatives, please visit our website, give us a call, come visit with a mask on. We will be happy to discuss all of these with you further. Before I introduce our speaker, I do want to, as Paul did, thank Mimi Cohen and the Cohen family for their ongoing support, caring, and for making this lecture a reality to share with all of you as their gift to the community. Tonight's program will take a slightly different approach from past programs. Rabbi Steve Leader, who I will introduce in a few minutes, will be in conversation with our own Dr. Betsy Stone, who has been a co-chair of this lecture for several years. So Dr. Stone is a retired clinical psychologist with experience teaching in synagogue schools at Hebrew Union College since 2002 and to groups of educators, rabbis, and parents. A well-known member of our community, Betsy has spent much of the pandemic teaching about trauma, resilience, and post-traumatic growth. She leads groups and offers keynotes for rabbis, cantors, educators, and parents. She is widely published in e-Jewish philanthropy. Rabbi Stephen Leader currently serves as the senior rabbi of the prestigious Wilshire Boulevard Temple in Los Angeles. Rabbi Leader is an author, a thought leader, a lecturer in high demand. Rabbi Leader received degrees from Northwestern University and spent time studying at Trinity College, Oxford University. Rabbi Leader received a master's degree in Hebrew letters and rabbinical ordination from Hebrew Union College. In addition to his many duties at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, Rabbi Leader taught homiletics, which is the art of preaching or writing sermons, for 13 years at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles. He's a regular contributor and guest on the Today Show, writes regularly for Time, Fox News, the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, and the Los Angeles Jewish Journal, where his Torah commentaries were read weekly by over 50,000 people. Rabbi Leader received the Louis Rappaport Award for Excellence in Commentary by the American Jewish Press Association and the Kovler Award from the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C. for his work in African-American Jewish dialogue. Rabbi Leader is the author of 4 books, with his most recent titles, The Beauty of What Remains, How Our Greatest Fear Becomes Our Greatest Gift, which was published just this past January, and More Beautiful Than Before, How Suffering Transforms Us, 2 books that illustrate Rabbi Leader's transformation on the subject of grief and loss. Newsweek magazine twice named him one of the 10 most influential rabbis in America, but what most important to Steve is being Betsy's husband, no, not our Betsy, and Aaron and Hannah's dad. If you have questions after our discussion with Rabbi Leader, you will see a button on the bottom right-hand side that says Q&A, and that is where you will ask your questions. Without any further ado, I ask you to please join me in greeting Dr. Rabbi Stephen Leader.
Rabbi Leader, it's really wonderful to have you here. Just allow me one moment of tangent. one of Saul's great abilities, magical abilities, was his ability to find the beauty in everything. That he was a painful optimist if you were actually spending time with him and wanted to complain about something. He was a constant source of joy. And so as I read your books, I thought about him a lot and about his ability to find beauty in anything.
Do you want to hear my favorite joke about that?
I do.
As long as we're on a tangent?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I love tangents.
All right. Okay, so the Jewish pessimist says, oh my God, things could not be worse. And the Jewish optimist says, of course they could.
Oh, we're going to have fun tonight.
Isn't that a great joke?
That's a great joke. That's a great joke. So I want to start back in More Beautiful Than Before.
Yes.
Because I found that led to the second book. When did you begin to understand, either as a rabbi or as a human, and those, you parse those pretty beautifully, that there were real lessons in pain, that pain was such a good teacher? When and how did you learn that?
When I suffered indescribable pain, which was 25 years after I had been a rabbi helping thousands of people through their own pain. Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian philosopher, said, I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't the fish. Now, a fish is born in water, lives in water, dies in water, and therefore, ironically, the fish is the one that is unaware of water. When does a fish discover water? Fish discovers water when it's yanked out of the water and it's wriggling on the end of a hook and gasping for air and flailing. That's when a fish discovers water. And so all the pain that I knew anything about, really, I mean, I'd had normal painful experiences, my girlfriend dumped me for an Israeli soldier and things like that. But
oh no.
Yes, that's never happened before. But really searing pain, the kind of pain that brings you to your knees, the kind of pain that really proves your helplessness and your vulnerability and your smallness. That kind of pain, it wasn't until I experienced that personally and then had to work my way through it that I really understood what a great and powerful teacher pain is. In fact, this is probably hyperbolic, but not by much. I actually think it is the only teacher. I think pain, disruption, is the only thing that shakes us by our shoulders and wakes us up to new realities.
Then that pain is the only teacher that makes us uncomfortable enough that we have to learn as opposed to choose to learn.
That's correct. That's right.
What would you parse physical pain and psychological pain, or do you think there's enough overlap that they needn't be parsed?
There is enough overlap that they are each capable of teaching the same lessons. However, the thing about, first of all, it's interesting in the research I did for More Beautiful Than Before, physical and emotional pain affect the same part of the brain. So that's interesting, right? The brain doesn't necessarily distinguish. The difference is, and this is where I think physical pain, and mine was quite extreme, is nevertheless in some ways easier to reckon with because you cannot re-feel it. You can re-feel, the misery around it, perhaps, and having to be, in my case, carried to the bathroom by my wife and my children and things like that. But the actual pain itself, once it's gone, cannot be refelt. But emotional pain, grief, for example, can be felt and is felt over and over and over again in a non-linear wave-like fashion. And so, look, neither is good. They're both powerful teachers, but I do think they're different. And the shelf life of physical pain, unless you live with chronic pain, for years, the shelf life of physical pain is different. Now, in my case, the physical pain caused a lot of emotional pain and distress, and so they were first cousins in my life, much like depression and anxiety.
Yep, that makes sense. There's some newer research just to put in your head that now looks at parts of your body that recycle pain, that actually, even when the pain isn't in the painful spot,
yes,
your brain is still producing pain responses.
Yeah, what I've read is and experienced myself is that the brain is still protecting the body as if.
Right, as it does psychologically. I mean,
right. But I think are you saying that you could actually feel the pain again?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
There's newer stuff. I will try to find it for you.
Yeah.
And I think we have that same sense of protecting ourselves around psychological pain. I'm not going to go there because it will remind me, or I am going to go there because I have to be there to be with that person.
Yes, I think we subordinate an awful lot and lock it in the basement of our psyche. But what you know because of what you did for a living, and what I know because of what I do and and my own life, is that you can lock these things in the basement, but they pound on the ceiling with a broomstick. And,
like your father, right?
Yeah. Yes. And eventually, you reckon with these things, or you engage in some dysfunctional behavior. You self-medicate, or you have some kind of addiction. But one way or another, these things ought to be reckoned with.
So after your accident and the pain that brought on, how did it change your relationships? Not as much with your personal family, but with kind of your relationship with the world, with your relationship with yourself. I mean, I would think at some level it kind of cuts you down to size.
Well, it's definitely a humbling experience to be at the mercy of nerve pain. Tell
us briefly about what happened.
All right. So I was just going to say we shouldn't assume that everyone listening understands. What happened was that I was in a very serious car accident that resulted in injury to my spine, and I was in just excruciating pain. And also quite frightened, because I don't know if you've ever had this experience or not, Betsy, but having your brain tell a part of your body to move and it won't move is a very frightening experience. My brain saying walk and my legs don't move is very frightening. And also, we have to layer on top of this, and here's the thing about opioids that people don't want to say, especially physicians. Sometimes there is absolutely nothing else that will work. Nothing. You can writhe and scream on the floor, or you can take an opioid, a powerful opioid.
Yep.
And those were my two choices until they would clear me for surgery. Once I got cleared for surgery, I had the surgery. And then I stayed on these opioids, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was addicted to these opioids, and I was depressed. And depressed to the point where if you had come to me at that, and I'm a very can-do, optimistic guy, I had a different personality. If you had come to me, Betsy, and said, Steve, I have magical powers. I can grant you any wish. World peace, the cure for all cancers, $100 billion to give to charity, whatever you want, you name it. I would have said, Betsy, leave me alone.
Not even take the pain away. Just leave me alone.
Just go away.
Yeah.
So that's the background. And now your question, okay, what did you learn from that? How did it change things? Well, it wasn't fast, okay? But here's what it did. I didn't even have a name for how I felt. Now, one of the nice things, rabbis complain a lot about being rabbis, and they often forget about just how great it is. And one of the great things about being a rabbi is doctors take really good care of you when something goes wrong. To have the rabbi die on your watch is a terrible stain on the reputation of a physician, right?
Very tacky.
Yeah. So I had a lot of doctors calling me and checking in on me. And one of my doctors called me every day. And I explained how I was feeling, and he said, well, you're depressed. And I had a name for it.
Makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference.
I thought, oh, that's what this is. This is how people feel when they suffer from depression. I get it. It's heavy and slow and dark.
And sticky.
Yeah. I think, I said it's like walking through mud.
Mm-hmm.
And that encouraged me to get help. So I started seeing a psychiatrist. And the way it changed me initially, to be frank about it, was it embittered me. Now, I didn't realize how bitter I was all along because of the sacrifices I had been making for 25 years for my congregation. And I just suppressed all of it with more work and more work and more work and more work. And you've read both books, so you know that workaholism was my father's religion, and it became my religion. Mm-hmm. And it was the way to subordinate everything, And at first, what it did was force me, with the help of a very talented psychiatrist, to start thinking about the source of my own bitterness and my resentment, which I hid. Now that's a high wire act for a rabbi. Mm-hmm. So I was engaged in kabuki all day, every day of my life, and I was good at it, really good at it.
But it costs you.
It cost me. That's right. And living that way, with that dissonance, with that dichotomous tension, I am who I am, I'm not who I am. I am who I am, I'm not who I am. I love what I do, I hate what I do. I love what I do, I hate what I do. I'll give you one very small example of the old Steve Leader. Okay. After the surgery, I had the surgery 3 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, and it was the Rosh Hashanah when we were reopening the sanctuary after a 23-month renovation for which I had raised, close to $100 million, which wasn't easy. And remember, I was really,
spent, sick, yes. Ill, tired.
Yes, I was wrung out. And
so you got on the bima.
Yeah. One of the trustees called me and said, I don't care if you need to be there in a stretcher. You have to be there. You're the congregation. You made this happen. Come on a stretcher. And then my doctor calls me, because doctors can be complicit in this. Listen, here's what we can do. You can have a driver in a car, and they'll bring you to my office at 4:30. I'll shoot you up. Then you go do the service. You'll have about 3 hours that you'll be able to stand, and then you'll crash, and we'll do the same thing the next morning. And guess what I said?
Okay. I as I hear this story, I keep thinking about its application in COVID times.
Yes.
that one of the things that we are seeing that's at least part of the what's called the Great Resignation is largely men, but not exclusively, saying to themselves, I have worked this hard and I've missed so much.
I think it's helped us all realize what we were doing to ourselves pre-pandemic,
Yes.
right? Now,
Yes.
let me just say that this evolution took me a very long time, and a lot of hard work, and even something as simple as no longer having 7:30 breakfast meetings was a massive change for me.
Right.
For me to call my assistant and say, no more appointments until 10 o'clock each morning, because it takes me a while to get going now in the morning after this. I thought I was going to get canceled the next day. I've lived every day like it was my last, because I'm going to get fired for not working hard enough and doing enough. Now, objectively, that's absurd, but this was my world. And this has been an ongoing change. Now, COVID pulled all the fish out of the water, right? First of all, COVID pierced the world's sense of invulnerability, right? Our sense of invulnerability was wiped away in an instant.
In many ways, invulnerability is an experience of privilege, though. I mean, I think that
yes, there were people who already had their invulnerability pierced long ago. Yes, but I'm talking to, you know who I'm talking to.
Right.
Talking to us.
Right.
Okay? I'm talking to people with a roof over their head and food in the fridge and a job they could do from wherever they needed to do it and money in the bank. We, the privileged, had our sense of invulnerability ripped away from us because the next person we saw everybody was walking with a loaded gun.
Right, exactly.
Remember the fear? It's easy to forget. We were wiping down packages and leaving them outside for 24 hours. And it's easy to forget how fearful we were. And this loss of this experience with vulnerability, the omnipresence of death, the body counts, the refrigerator trucks, frankly, had there been a little more of that, fewer charts and more real pictures of what it was like to die of COVID, I think people would have been more careful. But in any case, we all had a lot stripped away from us, not all of it bad.
Right.
Right? I wasn't spending 45 minutes, an hour and a half on the freeway to go have lunch with someone I don't even care about. Right? I wasn't dressing up in uncomfortable clothes and trying to dress the part. Right? I wasn't having night meetings, and I thought it was respectful to people to meet in person in my office with 4 or 5 people. It was actually disrespectful because it took hours out of everyone's day. So I think we all kind of learned again the simple pleasures, like going for a walk, sitting in the backyard,
right,
baking, cooking, right? So I think that, and it showed a lot of us how much the hurry and the scurry and the centrifuge of life had spun us all apart from each other and had seduced us.
This is a really interesting idea for me, both in terms of the adults that we work with, but also really in terms of our adolescents. I spend a lot of time thinking about how we have set adolescents up to think that the college resume is more important than the human resume, and that getting into an Ivy League school, if you're on the East Coast, or Stanford or UCLA, if you're or Berkeley, if you're on the West Coast, matters more than being a mensch.
Well, yes, and it's even worse than that because I think parents are often duplicitous. I think they often say the right things, but they don't live that way, and they don't curate their children's lives that way.
Right.
And that's an age-old problem.
It's a worse age-old problem right now and I think we see that in increases in adolescent anxiety and suicide and
Yes, and I think that the longest COVID tail is going to be for adolescents.
oh, for adolescents, not for, I keep thinking it's going to be for middle school, kids who are currently in middle school.
Kids who should be socializing with other kids. Let's put it that way.
Right.
All right. Kids who should not be in a cave with their parents for a year and a half. My daughter is an early childhood educator, and this has a very short tail for those kids.
Yes, I agree, because they don't know anything else.
Yeah, and they're happy to be home with mom and dad, or dad and dad, or mom and mom, or whomever. But the older kids, the teenagers, the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, these kids, I think it's going to have a very long tail. I don't think all of it bad. But yes, and I hoped, there's a chapter in the second book called Nobody Wants Your Crap, and the double entendre is intentional. And I hoped that the stripping away that COVID perpetrated
Forced on us, yeah.
would recalibrate our hedonic adaptation and our materialism. But guess what? All it did was create pent-up demand. And even worse, now I don't know how you feel about this, but it created a greater reliance on social media. And what ultimately is social media? Ultimately, what is its subtext?
A curated self. It's the curated self.
Yes. And it
so I will lie to you in public so that you can compare your insides to my curated self, and you will feel crappy about it.
Even worse, I think, that your outside is your inside, that your outer life is who you are, is a spiritual
Wouldn't that
life.
be tragic? Isn't that tragic?
It's happened. And the way I describe it is, it's like trying to eat a picture of food. It's not real. It will not nourish you. I live in Hollywood, which is clearly the belly of the beast in manufacturing this garbage for our kids. These shows all have different names, but the subtext, all these decorating shows and the fashion shows and the plastic surgery shows and the dating, they all have different names. But the subtext is, if you change your outer life, it will change your inner life. And I had hoped that COVID at least tapped the brakes a little bit, but I am not so sure.
No, I don't. I'm not so sure. And I think every time people talk about going back, what they're talking about is returning to that. So this leads me to, I have a couple of words that kept jumping out at me as I read the two books. I was really struck by your journey to forgiveness, the journey to forgiving your father, the journey to forgiving yourself. What do you think the obstacles are to forgiveness, and why is it so hard for us?
The greatest obstacle, I think, is, and this sounds very simple, but simple doesn't mean easy.
Right.
You have to admit that you were wrong. I think the three most difficult words for human beings to say, it's not "I'm sorry," because anybody who's married knows I'm sorry is like, a lot of latitude. Yeah. There's a lot of latitude in I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you think, I'm sorry you felt like I might, it's bullshit. The three most difficult words to say are, I was wrong. because that's to own it. Now, to have lived a certain way for 40, 50 years, to say, I was wrong, I was fooled, I was seduced, I was mistaken, I was played.
And I was complicit.
And, well, yes, of course. I didn't even see it.
Mm-hmm.
And, or I saw it and lived with the duplicity. I led a double life and I knew it and I couldn't get out of my own way. And these are very difficult things to face. And especially, now here's the really, I think, more nuanced part of this, especially if that duplicity or that dysfunctional way of living is exactly what made you successful. Now you're trapped,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the very thing that's embittering you and killing you inside is the very thing that's making you successful. Now
Which
what?
feeds you. Which feeds you.
And subordinates those feelings. So
Right.
now what, right? My workaholism made me a successful rabbi. I don't have higher SAT scores than most rabbis, Betsy. I can't translate Talmud better than most rabbis, but I outwork them all.
Mm-hmm.
Now what? If that's what I'm successful for and that's what's killing me and making me bitter, what do I do? What do I do? And of course the obvious answer is, well, you should be a little less successful and take care of yourself, but that's a level of maturity that I don't think I ever would have achieved, back to your initial question, without extraordinary pain and suffering.
And in some sense, you had to step out of yourself and look at yourself to be able to say, what am I doing?
I was the fish in the water.
Right, right. So what are the takeaways? What did you learn?
Well,
Oh, actually, wait a minute. Let me go back to this question for a second. I'm sorry. I want to ask you how you do that kind of forgiveness. When you say to yourself, I was wrong and I abused me, how do you not get up and do it again? Because that's really, I mean, lots of us can say, this is what we say when I know I need to lose weight and I'm standing in front of the refrigerator saying, don't eat that crap, and eating it again. I can say, oh, well, I really shouldn't have done that. But it's not the same thing as not eating it the next time.
yes. Well, you're asking a real question. I'm going to give you a real answer.
Yeah.
First of all, for me, for whatever reason, that back injury and that pain and that board member telling me, I don't care if you have to be there on a stretcher, woke me up to the fact that people didn't care about Steve Leader. They cared about the symbolic exemplar I had created for them.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't care about me.
They didn't know you.
No, but they also didn't care.
Yeah.
They wanted, they cared about their needs and the needs they brought to my role. Okay, so that's sobering.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, now this is, look, I take, I mean, it sounds silly to say it as a rabbi, but I'm a believer. I take Judaism seriously. I'm a believer. So I promised God. I made a promise to God, a vow, that I would not continue this self-destructive high wire act. It was over. And I think this is very similar to a 12-step program where one recognizes that there's a higher power and, you need help. So for me, it's funny, I'll just tell you like a quick little anecdote that I think indicates just how deep this runs in my psyche. I would always joke around with my kids when they were little and tell them funny stuff that they knew couldn't be true. They, no, you didn't. Say, yeah, I dated Britney Spears in high school. She was my first girlfriend. No, she wasn't, you know. And we would play these games. And they knew the way to get me to really tell the truth was they would say, do you swear on the Torah? And I would say, no, I didn't date Britney Spears. Like, you know, they had me. Okay.
Right.
That's how deep it is in me for whatever reason. So look, it's being disciplined about my mental health and my therapy. It is keeping my promise to God
Yourself and
to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, it's also the rewards of a less anxious and more authentic life.
Mm-hmm.
Because living on a high wire is really difficult.
Living on a high wire is there's this funny aspect, I think, of clergy's lives, of therapists' lives, potentially of doctors' lives, I'm not really sure, where people love you, but they don't know you. And that being loved is incredibly addictive, even though you know it's not, it doesn't have substance. And so, you know, you're the best.
Yeah, you feel like a fraud.
Right. And I know I'm not the best, but you're the best. Right. Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, there's of course, there's the kind of fraud squad that every celebrity or performer has. And rabbis in their own worlds are celebrities and performers. I remember saying to my psychiatrist once, I feel like the minute I walk out the front door of my house, I'm on stage, I'm acting. And you know what he said to me? He said, you are.
Well, and you know, to some degree, that's true of all of us.
Yes.
You know, to some
All
degree,
the world is a stage.
right. To some degree, anytime I'm with another human being, I'm performing.
Yes, but I think for clergy, you know, this is the role stress, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
if you and without the proper life experience, pain, loss, and maturity, boy, you can really get into trouble.
Yep. So I want to take a minute right now and remind people to put questions in the Q&A if you have them, and then I have a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
What do you think you learned? Like, if you could distill it down to 2 or 3 sentences, you know, because when it's a book, the lessons are in there.
Yeah, you want the haiku.
I want the haiku. Thank you. And it doesn't have to be the perfect number of syllables.
A few things.
I hated writing haiku.
I actually loved it because it's a distillate. I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, I like it was the numbers that drove me crazy.
Do you want to talk about it?
No, it's okay. We'll do that later.
I would say among the most significant things I learned is, number one, you know, there's this beautiful phrase in the Talmud about Rabbi Yochanan. It says, the prisoner cannot free himself.
Mm-hmm.
The prisoner cannot free himself. That's a very powerful insight. So I learned pain and the loss and the grief, the opioids, all of it. It taught me to reach out. I had to reach out. It humbled me to the point where I had to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
And beautiful things reveal themselves when you're willing to reach out. Will some people disappoint you? Yes, of course. But many will reach back to help lift you from your suffering. Many. And so the first, in no particular order, reaching out. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
The next is the power of no. The power of saying no. Because behind every no is a yes. No, I am not going to have breakfast meetings every weekday at 7:30 in the morning. Is saying yes, I'm going to give myself time to pray, to stretch, to breathe, and then move into my day. You know, that's a simple one, but it wasn't simple for me, you know, because my God, if I'm not working 20 hours a day,
What are you
what could
doing?
happen to me, you know? So the power of no, and realizing that saying no is simultaneously saying yes. It's almost like via negationis. You know, there's this theological concept, via negationis, which in theological terms, it's that you can understand what God is by understanding what God is not. That a lot of beauty is revealed by what's removed, like a sculpture.
Mhm.
A sculpture starts as a solid piece of marble. That beautiful sculpture was always there within it, but things had to be removed artfully to get to it. I have learned that much of life is the artful removal, not the adding, not the taking on of more, but the artful removal of things chip by chip by chip that have been camouflaging or dominating what is more beautiful underneath. So that's the power of no. I think it's very hard for overachievers and pleasers and people with messiah complexes. You know, rabbis run toward fires, not away from them. So do therapists. The power of no, very, very difficult for me. A very difficult lesson. But and now here, this is one that also might surprise people. It's going to require a little bit of a story. First of all, to understand what I'm about to describe, you have to realize that my father and I have looked almost identical at each stage of our lives. So if you saw a picture of myself at 10 and my father at 10, you couldn't tell the difference. These bags, Betsy, these are my father. Right? Okay.
So when you look in the mirror,
I see my 61-year-old father.
right,
I really do. And so does everyone else.
and he was not a particularly happy man.
No, he was a very anxious,
Angry.
angry guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And hilarious and crude and, you know, yeah.
Right.
He was so many things. So it's the morning of my father's funeral. We go to the synagogue and we're sitting in the, you know, the side room where they put the families who are sitting there waiting before the funeral starts. And the rabbi, young rabbi, walks in. And I remember saying to myself, I know exactly how the rabbi feels right now, but I have no idea how I feel.
Yep.
Because the book is really about dualities, and in this case, the duality of Rabbi Steve Leder and Steve Leder the son. They're not the same people.
No. God,
And
we
so-
would hope not.
Yeah, well, yes. So the rabbi walks us in to view my father's body before the casket is closed and the service, people will be let in for the service. Now, Betsy, I had stood, no hyperbole, I had stood next to 1,000 families looking into the casket of their loved one. And honestly, I could have eaten a sandwich. It didn't affect me. I was there helping them. I mean, I felt for them, but I had no visceral or emotional response to looking at dead bodies. None. You know, because I had that shard of ice that rabbis have to have. We walk into the sanctuary. I approach this is still hard for me. I approach my father's casket. And I look into the casket. And I think to myself, that's exactly what I'm going to look like when I'm dead. And my son is bending over my casket. I was, 57 years old, having officiated at more than 1,000 funerals, seen 1,000 dead bodies, and Betsy, it wasn't until that moment that I realized I was going to die. And that realization changed my life.
Yes, because you can't work so hard that that will never happen to you. And A, and B, I'm constantly aware of what we put on our gravestones.
Oh, it's very interesting. Yes, I have as you know, an essay about it in the book. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
When you have to distill a person's life down to 4 lines and 15 characters per line, you're engaged in some real essentialism. But to answer your question about what did I learn, it sounds simple, but again, not easy. I learned I'm going to die. And therefore, I want to make some changes about the way I live.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think
why the book's called The Beauty of What Remains. I mean, that's what death gives us. It gives us some gratitude for the beauty of what remains.
And in many ways, that kind of brings us back where we were earlier. And I'm about to hand this over to Connie and Alan to do some questions that are in the Q&A. But it kind of brings us back to where we began with questions of forgiveness and what is forgiveness. And I think that so much of forgiveness has to do with understanding that they don't give A's at living or parenting or being a son or being a daughter. And that part of what we have to do in our forgiveness is to begin to say to ourselves, that's what I can do. I can do more. If I can do more, I will do more. But this is what I can do if I'm gonna lead a real life.
Yes, and also I would also add, in my case at least, being able to understand how and why I behaved the way I did. And that any person would, in the same circumstances, anybody who grew up with my father would have turned out exactly like me.
But that you have choices when you, at some point in your life.
Yes.
You don't have, right.
Exactly.
Somebody else can write the script. You don't have to sit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep, but at least I understand how I turned out the way I did and why I needed to work on myself, and that it wasn't a character flaw. It was a natural result of things I had no control over.
Right. I'm sorry that we have to end this part. I have really enjoyed speaking with you.
You're the best. I want to take you on the road with me. You're at a different level. It's
thank you so much.
Refreshing to be.
Thank you so much. That is really lovely to hear. Connie and Alan are going to spend a couple minutes with you asking some questions that the audience had. And I think I'm coming out to the CCAR in San Diego, so maybe we'll get to actually meet in person.
I hope so.
Thank you so much. I'm going to disappear, and you're going to be with Connie and Alan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi there.
The first question, some people have a huge stigma about going to seek mental health because it means admitting they're mentally incompetent, in quotes, crazy. Please give them some advice on how to encourage someone to seek therapy when they truly believe they do not need it.
Well, they don't need it, or they think it's a weakness and it's an embarrassment and there's a stigma. There's a difference.
Yes. Yeah, there is a difference.
I think if so let's answer both. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's answer the first, which is this issue of the stigma that surrounds mental health. Okay. There are a lot of jokes about, Jews and suffering and how, like a sad Jew is a happy Jew. And there are all these things that we say about ourselves as if suffering is some badge of honor. It's not. We were not born to suffer. We were not put on earth to suffer. The Talmud says when we die, we'll be taken to task by the heavenly court for every permissible pleasure we could have enjoyed on earth and did not. So there's no meritorious component to suffering. It's not a mitzvah. And in terms of the stigma, look, I wear these because I don't have 20/20 vision without them. Neither would either of you. Nobody cares Nobody cares that I wear glasses. Nobody thinks twice about the fact that I wear glasses. If I had diabetes,
No, it's not. Is it?
if I had diabetes, I would, take insulin in a second. And brain chemistry is really no different. If it were up to me, I'd put Zoloft or Lexapro in the water like fluoride, because we can all benefit from managing our anxiety. Now, that's an overstatement, of course, about the fluoride, but in so many aspects of our life, store-bought is fine. Store-bought is great. We get takeout food, right? I have glasses. Store-bought drugs that will help us experience levels of anxiety or depression that are within the normal range rather than the extreme range are a blessing. They're a miracle. They're a gift. And I did a segment, people can Google it if they want, 2 or 3 weeks ago, the week of World Mental Health Awareness Day. I did a segment where I came out about my own underlying anxiety disorder and how I finally got treatment, finally started taking medication, and finally am living life like with a normal human level of anxiety. It's beautiful. And I'm not ashamed of it. And I think the more of us who come out and talk about it, it's very interesting. After that segment, the members of my congregation, the hundreds of emails that came in. Thank you, me too. Thank you, me too. Thank you, my wife. Thank you, my son. Thank you, my parents. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Me too, me too, me too. What? Let's get there. We've gotten there with human sexuality. We've gotten there with so many physical ailments. Let's get there. But the only way to get there is if we're willing to be open about it, because celebrities being open about it doesn't really help most people, because we don't think of ourselves as celebrities and we don't identify with celebrities, really. That's why they're celebrities. So when doctors and lawyers and school teachers and parents and plumbers and auto mechanics, when we come out, that's an important message. So that's the stigma piece. Now, in terms of I don't need it, well, okay. If you don't need it, you don't need it. I would suggest go in for a 1 hour, which is 50 minutes. Go in for a 50-minute consultation and find out. Maybe you're right. Maybe you don't. But maybe there is some benefit. Go find out. It's no different than an annual checkup. I'm fine. I'm healthy. Well, just go run some tests. Let's make sure. Why not? And that's what I would say. Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe you're not. Go find out.
Okay. This is a little bit of a different take. So did the surgery help your physical pain and then you realized you were depressed? Or when the surgery didn't help the physical pain, you realized it was something else driving your physical discomfort? If you hadn't had the accident, would your body/self have had to manufacture some sort of a situation to bring things to a head?
It's such a good question, and I've thought a lot about it. First of all, the surgery did relieve my pain. There was post-surgical pain, but the surgery relieved the extraordinary nerve pain that I was suffering from. And of course, my body continued to protect itself. I still limped, and I still had all these affectations, but with physical therapy, I got through that. The depression was before, during, and after, because I was on these opioids. And, it's very interesting that not long after the surgery, a woman who was a trustee of the temple called me. Women, by the way, generally speaking, in my life have been much more intuitive about this than men. She called me and she said, "You broke your back for the temple." Now, she was literally incorrect, but the feeling I had. She was metaphorically exactly right. She said, you broke your back for the temple. Do I think my back would have broken in some way at some point? Yes. Yes. How that would have been, I don't know. But yes, I think that there had to be a reckoning with leading that kind of life sooner or later. And this is why why the book's called More Beautiful Than Before. When you have these reckonings, as difficult as they are, generally speaking, you end up with a more beautiful life on the back end. And that's not to say, let's be clear, that's not to say it's worth it. Like I would give every insight I've achieved to have my dad back again. If I could have my dad back with no Alzheimer's, I'd give up everything I learned. But I don't have that choice. So I'm not saying that these changes and insights are worth it. I'm saying don't let them be worthless. Dostoevsky said that his greatest fear was that his life would not be worthy of his suffering. I think that's a very profound idea. We all suffer. We all go through some kind of hell. You don't have to come out empty-handed. The question is, can you be worthy? Can you lead a life worthy of your suffering? Can you do something with it that ennobles your life? And that's why I wrote these books. I wrote them as apologies for what I thought I knew that I really didn't, and what I hope I can share, and that I hope I can be worthy of my losses and my mistakes. And that's the best we can do. And I think that's a lot.
Okay. This is going to be our last question. Do you agree with the idea of everything happens for a reason? And does this same principle apply for irreversibly terrible things that happen to everyone?
If it's true, it can only be true in ways that don't make sense to human beings. I'm not saying it isn't true. I'm saying from a human perspective, it doesn't seem true. This is the book of Job. This is, this is God's answer to Job. And I'll try to do this quickly, but I know it's 3 hours later there. But, Job is this good man. He's done nothing wrong. And God's bragging about his noble servant Job. And the devil says, yeah, he's a noble servant. Make him suffer and he'll turn on you, like that. So God takes the bet and destroys Job's life, his family, his health, his business. It's all gone. He's suffering. His friends come to see him and say, you must have been bad. And he says, no, I haven't been bad. On the contrary, I've been quite good. And finally, Job gets fed up and he summons God and says, God, why me? I'm a good person. And does God defend God's self? No. God says, I'm paraphrasing, of course, are you big? I am. Do you keep the ocean in its shores? Do you make the sun rise? Did you fill Leviathan's nostrils with harpoons? Try it. In other words, who is puny little man with his puny powers of reason to expect the cosmos to be just the way the world is just? In other words, you're only human. You will never understand the ways in which what happened fits into this is God talking, great plan for the universe. And what does Job respond? Job says, I have heard thee. He renounces his human judgment before the mystery that is God. So do things happen for a reason? Does everything happen for a reason? Not for any reason human beings can discern. But that doesn't mean they don't happen for a reason. And this is why I'm being a little bit evasive about the question. I think maybe the honest answer from a human perspective is seemingly not, right? Seemingly not. Okay, but I'm qualifying it because I'm not big. I'm human.
Well, on that note, on behalf of the Stanford JCC and Schoke JFS, we want to thank Rabbi Lader for a very illuminating and wonderful talk this evening. We also want to thank Betsy Stone and Michael Stone, Dr. Betsy Stone, for all the work that you put in organizing the lecture and engaging with the rabbi this evening. Of course, the largest thanks go to Mimi Cohen and the entire Cohen family for continuing this legacy for the 10th year of Saul's legacy. And thank you to all of you for joining us this year. And with that, good night to all.